Let me be direct with you from the outset, because the situation unfolding in the Red Sea demands directness. What we are witnessing is not a piracy crisis, it is not a shipping disruption. What we are witnessing is China executing the most sophisticated geopolitical repositioning in modern maritime history, and they are doing it so quietly that most Western analysts have completely missed what is actually happening. I'm looking at port development contracts, naval base agreements, and shipping route data that have been circulating among maritime industry analysts for the past 6 weeks. What these documents show is not random Chinese investment. What they show is a coordinated strategy to control the Red Sea corridor while the United States is distracted by the Houthi attacks, and to do it in a way that makes American naval presence in the region permanently untenable. In the next 22 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what China has built in the past 18 months, why it represents a complete restructuring of Red Sea logistics and security, and why major shipping companies are already rerouting their vessels to Chinese controlled infrastructure, even as the U.S. Navy conducts operations against Houthi targets. This is Daily Brief with Dr. Marandi. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being debated in emergency sessions at major shipping companies right now. Let's start with the geography, because understanding the physical constraints explains why this matters so profoundly. The Red Sea connects the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean through two critical choke points: the Suez Canal in the north and the Bab el Mandeb Strait in the south. The Bab el Mandeb is approximately 18 miles wide at its narrowest point, and through this strait passes roughly 12% of global trade and 10% of global oil shipments. The United States has maintained a dominant naval presence in this region since the 1950s through the Fifth Fleet and strategic partnerships with Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and more recently, Djibouti. The assumption has been that American military power guarantees freedom of navigation and that major shipping lanes operate under de facto U.S. security umbrella. According to Lloyd's List Intelligence, approximately 21,000 vessels transit the Red Sea annually, carrying an estimated $1 trillion in goods. The efficiency of this route compared to the alternative around Africa saves approximately 10 days of transit time and $500,000 in fuel costs per voyage for a typical container ship. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now let's talk about what China has actually built while everyone was focused on Houthi missile attacks. Announcement number one: the Djibouti expansion. And this one matters more than anything else because of the scale and specific capabilities. China established its first overseas military base in Djibouti in 2017. What has happened since then has been systematically underreported in Western media. According to satellite imagery analysis by Stratfor and confirmed by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, China has expanded that base from an initial 90 acres to over 500 acres as of April 2026. The expansion includes a deep-water pier capable of servicing aircraft carriers, underground fuel storage facilities with capacity for approximately 500 million liters, barracks facilities capable of housing 10,000 personnel, and most significantly, advanced radar and electronic surveillance systems that provide coverage of the entire Bab el Mandeb Strait and approaches to the Red Sea. Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, stated in testimony to the Senate Armed Services Committee on April 12, 2026, that the Djibouti facility now represents, and I am quoting him directly here, a permanent Chinese military presence with greater operational capacity than anything the People's Liberation Army has constructed outside mainland China in modern history. China currently maintains between 2,000 and 4,000 military personnel at Djibouti at any given time, according to Defense Intelligence Agency assessments. But here is what makes this consequential. Those forces are positioned exactly 8 miles from the U.S. military base Camp Lemonnier, which houses approximately 4,000 American troops. Two rival powers, nuclear armed, with military bases within visual range of each other, operating in a region with active conflict and attacks on commercial shipping. That is not a stable equilibrium. That is a powder keg. Received. That is announcement number one. Announcement number two: the port network. This is the part that transforms Chinese military presence into Chinese control of commercial infrastructure. China has acquired port operating agreements, equity stakes, or management contracts at 8 strategic ports surrounding the Red Sea: Djibouti, Port Sudan, Massawa in Eritrea, Aden in Yemen, Salalah in Oman, Gwadar in Pakistan, Berbera in Somaliland, and Hodeida in Yemen through various proxies and partnership arrangements. According to a detailed investigation by the Wall Street Journal published March 2026, Chinese state-owned enterprises now control or significantly influence approximately 60% of port capacity on both sides of the Red Sea corridor. This is not coincidence. This is systematic acquisition of choke point infrastructure. When the Houthi attacks escalated in January 2026, major shipping companies including Maersk, MSC, and CMA CGM initially suspended Red Sea transits and rerouted around Africa. But according to shipping data from marine traffic and confirmed by industry analysts, by March 2026, many of those same companies had resumed Red Sea transits but were now using Chinese-managed ports for refueling, maintenance, and crew changes rather than traditional facilities in Saudi Arabia or Egypt. Why? Because Chinese port facilities offered guaranteed security, Chinese naval escorts where needed, and insurance cost reductions of up to 35% compared to operating without Chinese coordination. The commercial logic is undeniable. If Chinese infrastructure offers better security and lower costs, shipping companies will use it regardless of geopolitical considerations. Received. That is announcement number 2, announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The protection agreements. In February 2026, China quietly signed what it calls maritime security cooperation frameworks with the governments of Sudan, Eritrea, and through intermediaries, with Houthi authorities controlling portions of Yemen. These agreements commit China to providing anti-piracy protection, maritime domain awareness, and port security support in exchange for preferential access to ports and territorial waters. This language is deliberately chosen. Anti-piracy protection sounds defensive and benign, but the operational reality is that Chinese naval vessels are now conducting regular patrols in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and those vessels have authorization to operate in the territorial waters of multiple nations surrounding the choke point. According to reporting by Reuters based on ship tracking data, China now maintains an average of 5 to 8 naval vessels in the Red Sea at any given time, including destroyers equipped with advanced air defense systems and submarines capable of operating in the shallow waters characteristic of the region. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the implications for American naval operations become impossible to ignore. When the United States launched Operation Prosperity Guardian in December 2023 to protect shipping from Houthi attacks, it expected traditional allies to contribute naval vessels and coordinate operations. The United Kingdom, France, and Italy did contribute, but with far fewer ships than anticipated and with significant operational restrictions. But here's what changed the calculation for many nations. By March 2026, Chinese escorted convoys transiting the Red Sea had not experienced a single Houthi attack, 0. Meanwhile, vessels operating under Operation Prosperity Guardian continued to face sporadic missile and drone attacks despite U.S. and allied air defense systems. How is China achieving this? According to intelligence assessments partially described in a Financial Times investigation from April 2026, China has direct diplomatic and economic relationships with Iran, which supplies the Houthis with weapons and intelligence. China has communicated to Iran that attacks on Chinese-flagged vessels or ships under Chinese protection would jeopardize Chinese investment in Iranian infrastructure and oil purchases. Iran has evidently agreed. Houthi attacks target American, European, and Israeli-linked shipping. They do not target Chinese vessels or Chinese-escorted convoys. This creates a two-tier system where protection depends not on international law or naval power, but on political relationships with the parties conducting the attacks. And shipping companies are responding rationally to this reality. According to data from Container Trade Statistics, the volume of cargo transiting the Red Sea under Chinese escort or calling at Chinese-managed ports increased by 340% between January and April 2026. The volume operating under U.S.-led protection arrangements increased by only 15%. The market is voting, and the market is choosing Chinese protection over American military might because Chinese protection actually works and costs less in insurance premiums. That is announcement number 3, and it is the one that explains why this situation is fundamentally different from previous maritime security crises. Received. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The public story is about Houthi attacks, American military responses, and protecting freedom of navigation. That is the story you hear from the Pentagon and read in Western newspapers. The actual story is about the transfer of maritime security provision from the United States to China and the systematic replacement of American influence with Chinese commercial and military control across the Red Sea corridor. Look at what happened when President Biden met with Egyptian President Sisi on April 15, 2026. The public statements emphasized shared commitment to regional stability and cooperation on counterterrorism. But according to leaked diplomatic cables reported by Al Jazeera, The actual conversation focused on Egypt's request for $15 billion in Chinese infrastructure financing for Suez Canal expansion projects. Egypt, America's supposed strategic partner, receiving billions per year in U.S. military aid, is now negotiating massive infrastructure deals with China that will give Chinese state owned enterprises significant control over Suez Canal operations. And the Biden administration's response? Public silence and private concerns, but no counteroffer competitive with Chinese financing terms? Saudi Arabia presents an even more dramatic example. For 75 years, Saudi Arabia's security has been guaranteed by American military presence and arms sales, but in March 2026, Saudi Arabia signed a $50 billion investment agreement with China covering port development, refinery construction, and naval coordination. When Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin raised concerns about this agreement during a visit to Riyadh in April, according to sources cited by the Wall Street Journal, the Saudi response was blunt. If American security guarantees were sufficient, we would not need to make these arrangements. But Houthi missiles reach our oil facilities, and American air defense systems have not stopped them. Chinese diplomacy with Iran has. That is not subtle. That is regional allies openly questioning American effectiveness and hedging their security through relationships with China. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States commits naval forces to a region, announces a major protection operation, and regional allies immediately begin signing security and infrastructure deals with America's primary rival, that is not diplomatic nuance. That is not hedging normal geopolitical risk. That is a verdict on American capability and reliability. If you operate a business dependent on Red Sea shipping, if you manage supply chains that rely on the Suez Canal route, if you work in energy markets affected by Middle East instability, what is happening in the Red Sea is not just a security story, it is a fundamental restructuring of who controls global logistics and on what terms. Insurance companies are already pricing this reality. According to data from marine insurance brokers compiled by S&P Global, premiums for Red Sea transits under American protection are currently 3 to 4 times higher than transits under Chinese arrangements. That differential is not speculation about future risk. That is the market's assessment of present effectiveness. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. In 1869, when the Suez Canal opened, the dominant naval power was the British Empire. Britain controlled Egypt, maintained naval bases throughout the region, and guaranteed free passage for all commercial shipping. That system worked for 80 years. Then came the 1956 Suez Crisis. Egypt nationalized the canal. Britain and France attempted military intervention to maintain control. The United States opposed the intervention. The Soviet Union threatened nuclear retaliation. Britain and France withdrew in humiliation, and the result? The British Empire's credibility as a global security guarantor collapsed. Within 15 years, Britain had withdrawn from most of its overseas military commitments and ceded global naval dominance to the United States. The parallel to 2026 is exact. The United States maintains naval presence, conducts military operations, and claims to guarantee freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. But attacks continue. Shipping companies seek alternative protection. Regional allies negotiate security arrangements with rival powers, and the dominant power finds its military capabilities insufficient to provide the security that commercial and political actors actually need. China in 2026 is playing the role the United States played in 1956. It is not directly challenging American military forces, it is simply providing an alternative system that works better for the actual users. And when that alternative proves more effective and less costly, the transfer of influence happens through market forces, not military confrontation. The United States withdrew from global naval dominance not because the Royal Navy was defeated in battle, but because British security guarantees became unreliable and expensive. The United States is now experiencing the same dynamic in the Red Sea, with China positioned as the ascending alternative. So, where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, the United States accepts Chinese dominance in Red Sea security and focuses its naval resources on higher priority regions like the South China Sea. This means acknowledging that it cannot effectively compete with Chinese commercial influence and political relationships in this theater. Under this path, the Red Sea becomes a Chinese-managed corridor, European and Asian shipping becomes dependent on Chinese security provision, and American influence in the Middle East continues its long decline. Probability, 45%. Path 2, the United States escalates dramatically, deploying additional carrier groups, expanding military operations against Houthi targets regardless of collateral damage, and pressuring regional allies to reject Chinese infrastructure deals. This carries obvious risks of direct confrontation with Chinese naval forces, alienation of regional partners who want Chinese investment, and potential for humanitarian catastrophe if military operations intensify. Under this path, insurance costs spike even higher, shipping companies avoid the region entirely, and the Suez route becomes economically non viable for many cargoes. Probability 20%. Path 3, the United States attempts managed competition, maintaining naval presence while matching Chinese infrastructure investment and developing political relationships that could influence Houthi behavior. This is the most strategically sophisticated option, but requires resources and political will that may not exist. Under this path, the Red Sea becomes a contested space with dual security systems. Shipping companies choose based on commercial calculation, and the competition plays out over years through infrastructure development and diplomatic engagement rather than military confrontation. Probability 35%. I think we are seeing Path 1 unfold in real time, though the Biden administration will never describe it that way publicly. The Pentagon's own strategic documents prioritize Pacific deterrence. The defense budget cannot fund both effective Middle East presence and credible Pacific capabilities. And most importantly, the commercial market has already made its choice. Chinese protection works and costs less. But here is the complication that makes this transition dangerous. Naval forces from two nuclear-armed rivals operating in close proximity in a region with active conflict creates enormous potential for miscalculation and escalation. One maritime incident, one navigation error, one weapons system malfunction, and this managed Chinese ascendance could become something far more dangerous. Here are the questions I want you to take away. Can the United States compete with Chinese infrastructure financing and political relationships in regions where American military power proves insufficient? If China controls the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and increasingly the South China Sea, what does that mean for global trade that depends on those routes? And what does freedom of navigation mean when it is provided by China rather than America? Tell me in the comments what path you think this takes. Tell me if you see a fourth option I have not described. Tell me whether your business or industry is already feeling the effects of this shift in Red Sea security. We will keep tracking every development in Chinese port acquisitions, naval deployments, and commercial shipping patterns. That is what Daily Brief does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who depends on global shipping, who manages international supply chains, or who is trying to understand what the Houthi crisis really represents for the global order. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.